The sun dipped below the jagged mountains, casting long shadows across the land. The kingdom of Aeloria lay quiet, cloaked in the soft gloom of twilight. In a tall tower of cold gray stone, Lady Seraphine paced her room, the weight of her thoughts pressing her shoulders down. Today marked her 21st birthday, the day her family had whispered about in fear for generations. A day when destiny would awaken, and she would no longer be free. She could feel it even now, a strange pull, a tug deep in her bones that made the air seem heavier, as if the walls themselves were leaning closer. Her fingers brushed against the old locket her mother had given her before she died. It was engraved with a pattern she had never understood, yet it felt alive in her hand. That locket was the key. Somehow it always had been. A sharp gust rattled the window and shadows danced across the room. Seraphine shivered, not from cold, but from an unsettling certainty. The stories were true. The curse was real. It had bound her life to Lord Kale, the dark and feared prince of Aeloria. Her family had resisted it for generations, but the curse was patient, waiting for the moment she would come of age. Kyle's name had been whispered with fear for years, even by those who had never seen him. Tales of his strength, his cold heart, and the way his gaze could silence a room made many avoid the royal court entirely. He was powerful, dangerous, and untouchable, and now, by the cruel laws of magic, Seraphine was his. She tried to push the thought away, pacing faster. I will not be claimed. I will not bow, she muttered to herself. But the air seemed to hum in response, and the shadows shifted as if listening. The first sign came just as the moon rose fully into the sky. The locket grew warm in her hand, pulsing with an energy she could feel in her chest. Then came the soft whisper, a voice neither inside nor outside her mind. You belong to him. Seraphine dropped to her knees, clutching her locket. The voice was not cruel, but it carried a weight that made her tremble. She had been warned. The curse could not be broken by anger or force. Only by choice, or so the whisper said. A sudden crack of thunder shook the tower, and the shadows on the walls stretched toward her, long and twisting like reaching hands. Seraphine could no longer deny it. She was being pulled. Something invisible dragged her toward Kale's fortress, far to the north, a place none dared enter without fear, and yet against all instinct a small flicker of curiosity stirred inside her. By dawn she found herself standing before the gates of Kale's fortress. The structure loomed like a dark sentinel, its spires clawing at the sky. Guards with armor black as midnight eyed her with suspicion, but they did not move to stop her. Magic had opened the path. The curse had begun its work. Inside, the hallways were vast and cold, lined with banners that bore Kale's sigil, a black wolf with eyes like burning embers. Every step Seraphine took echoed through the halls, and with each echo, her heart pounded faster. She was not afraid of the danger. She was afraid of him. When Kale finally appeared, the world seemed to pause. He stood tall, draped in a cloak that shimmered like the night sky. His hair was dark as obsidian, and his eyes, piercing and golden, held a power that seemed to reach into her very soul. Seraphine felt the pull of the curse stronger now, as if it were a tether tied around her heart. You are here, he said, his voice low and steady. There was no warmth in it, but neither was there cruelty. It was a voice of inevitability. I do not wish to be claimed, Seraphine said, her voice trembling slightly, though her chin was lifted in defiance. Kale studied her for a long moment. The choice is not yours, he said simply, but he did not move closer. He allowed her to stand, to breathe, to resist. For now, days passed, and the fortress became both prison and sanctuary. Seraphine learned its rules quickly. The halls were silent, the servants careful, and the eyes of Kale always watching. She discovered that the curse did not bind her merely to Kale's presence. It bound her to his emotions, his moods, and even the very energy he gave off. When he was near, her thoughts became sharper, her senses heightened, and her pulse raced. But Seraphine was not willing to surrender so easily. She began testing the bounds of the curse, small acts of rebellion, refusing his commands, wandering parts of the fortress uninvited, and even speaking when she was expected to be silent. Each act was a spark against the darkness, and each spark ignited something unfamiliar in Kale. He began to notice her courage, her intelligence, and her unyielding spirit. In private moments, when the walls of the fortress muffled the world outside, he allowed her presence closer. He observed her with quiet fascination, though he would never admit it. The curse demanded that she be his, but he found himself wanting her to be his not by magic but by choice. One evening, under the pale glow of the moon, Seraphine ventured into the tower gardens. The air smelled of damp earth and roses, though the flowers were dark, almost black. Cale followed silently, and she did not turn to face him. "You test the limits," he said, his tone neither angry nor approving. "I test myself," she replied softly. "Not you. Not the curse." Cale's golden eyes lingered on her face. There was a moment, a heartbeat, where the air itself seemed to hold its breath. He wanted to reach for her, to pull her into the shadows of the garden, but he held back. The curse had its rules. So did his heart. A week later, a messenger arrived with news that would change everything. A shadowy figure, an old rival of Cale's family, had returned to the kingdom. This rival sought the power of the curse itself, threatening both Seraphine and Cale. Seraphine realized then that the danger was not just the bond that tied her to Cale. It was the world outside, filled with forces that would exploit it. She could not be a passive pawn. She had to be active, clever, strong, and she would be. The curse pulsed in her chest like a heartbeat. It whispered that she was bound, that Cale's will could command her, and that her soul might belong to him forever. But another voice, the one only she could hear, told her that power could be twisted, fate could be bent, and even a curse could be turned into a choice. As Cale stood behind her in the garden, silent and observing, Seraphine made her decision. She would not bow. She would not fear. She would find the path to turn the curse into something else. Something forbidden, dangerous, and beautiful. Something like love. And in that moment, the wind carried a warning. Soft as a sigh. If you surrender to the curse without love, your soul will belong to him forever. Seraphine's eyes narrowed, determination burning in their depths. She would not be a prisoner of magic. She would not be a pawn of destiny. She would choose, and in that choice she would find her own power. But Cale, standing silently in the shadows, did not move, did not speak. Yet his golden eyes revealed a flicker of something he did not wish to show. Hope, fear, or perhaps a spark of forbidden desire. And so, the first step had been taken. The chains of fate were in place, the bond of the curse beginning to tighten, and the stage was set for a struggle between destiny, desire, and the courage of a heart that refused to yield. The kingdom slept, unaware that a storm had begun. A storm not of wind and rain, but of hearts and shadows, curses and choices, danger and longing. A storm that would not end until both Seraphine and Cale discovered whether the curse was a chain, or a path to a love that should never exist. And as the first night passed, the fortress whispered secrets to the darkness. Secrets only Seraphine could hear, secrets that promised that the coming days would test them both in ways neither was ready to face. The curse had begun, and so had the forbidden game of hearts. The days passed slowly in Cale's fortress, each one heavier than the last. Lady Seraphine moved like a shadow through the cold halls, her mind always alert, her heart always defiant. The curse pulsed within her, a constant reminder that her destiny was tied to the prince she was supposed to fear, and yet she no longer felt fear in the same way. It had shifted into something more complicated, something she dared not name aloud. Cale watched her closely, always silent, always observing. His golden eyes followed her every move, catching the smallest flicker of defiance, the slightest hesitation, the faintest spark of courage. He had never seen anyone like her. Most before her had bowed, had submitted, had accepted the weight of the curse without question. But Seraphine, she challenged it. And in that challenge, she challenged him. One evening, as a storm raged outside and lightning split the sky in jagged streaks, Seraphine wandered into the fortress's high tower. The wind tore at her cloak, and the distant rumble of thunder made her heart beat faster, but she did not stop. Cale followed, silent as always, until they reached the top of the tower. The storm cast everything in sharp contrast. The darkness of the clouds, the silver of the rain, and the faint glow of magical energy that the curse still exuded. "You should not be here," Cale said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I am here because I choose to be," Seraphine replied, her eyes meeting his without flinching. "The curse wants me to obey you. I choose to stand anyway." Cale studied her, and for the first time he did not see a woman bound by magic. He saw someone strong, determined, unyielding, and the pull he felt toward her, the pull that had always been part of the curse, shifted. It became something more, something human, something real. The storm intensified, and with it the magic of the curse flared. Shadows twisted across the walls, and the very stones of the fortress seemed to hum with power. Seraphine felt it in her bones. The curse would test her now more than ever, pushing her toward despair, toward surrender. But she clenched her fists and lifted her chin. She would not yield to fear. She would face the darkness head-on. "You are stronger than I expected," Kale admitted, his voice barely audible over the wind. "But the curse, it will not let us both walk freely. You will feel its pull tonight more than ever." Seraphine did not reply. She turned toward the storm, feeling the energy of the curse surge through her, mixing with the electricity of the storm. And then, she did something no one had ever dared. She called out to it, not in fear but in defiance. "I will not be bound by fear. I will not be a pawn. If this curse is to exist, then it will exist on my terms." The wind screamed, the shadows writhed, and for a moment everything was chaos. Kyle reached for her instinctively, his hand brushing against hers, and the contact sent a spark through them both. It was not the curse binding them. It was something deeper, something that had begun in the quiet moments of observation, in the silent understanding between them. You're bending it," Kyle whispered, awe and disbelief in his voice. Seraphine turned to him, her eyes fierce yet tender. "I am not a prisoner, Kale, and neither are you. The curse only works if we let it control us. We will not let it." For the first time, Kyle saw a way forward that did not involve domination or fear. He stepped closer, and this time, there was no restraint in his movements. But even then, he did not take her by force. He simply stood beside her, offering his presence as support, as a shared strength. The night deepened, and with it came the test of the curse's true power. A shadow, dark and twisting, emerged from the storm. It was a remnant of the sorceress who had cast the curse generations ago, seeking to claim Seraphine's soul and bind it permanently to Kale. The shadow hissed, reaching with tendrils that seemed to drain the light from the very air. Seraphine faced it without fear. She raised the locket her mother had given her, and the pulse of magic that had always been part of her family flared brightly. Kale placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, and together they confronted the darkness. "You will not take her," Kale roared, and for the first time the sound of his voice was not just authority. It was protection, longing and love intertwined. The shadow shrieked, recoiling from the combined power of Seraphine's courage and Kale's intent. In that moment, the curse, which had always sought to bind them through fear, began to shift. It responded to choice, to will, to the bond they were forming of their own accord. Seraphine stepped forward, holding the locket high. "This is not your power to claim," she shouted. "The curse exists only because of fear. We choose love instead." A brilliant light erupted from the locket, spreading across the tower, across the storm, across the very heart of the fortress. The shadow screamed one final time before dissolving into nothingness. The curse pulsed one last time, and then it was gone. Kale turned to her, his eyes wide, his golden gaze softer now, more human than it had ever been. You have done it," he said, awe and wonder in his voice. "You have turned the curse into something else. Something real." Seraphine let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like years. She was free, but more importantly, they were free. Free to choose each other, free to shape their own destiny, free to feel what had once been forbidden. Kale reached for her, and this time, there was no magic, no compulsion, only choice. He took her hand gently, and she allowed him. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Their eyes met, and in that gaze, the world seemed to fall away. "You could have been afraid," Kale said softly. "But you were not." "I was afraid," Seraphine admitted, "but I faced it anyway. And I choose you. Not because of the curse, but because of you." For the first time, Kyle smiled, a small, hesitant smile that held years of pain, loss, and longing. "And I choose you, Seraphine. Not because magic forced me, but because my heart does." The storm outside began to calm, and the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The fortress, once cold and forbidding, seemed warmer now, filled with the quiet glow of hope. Shadows receded from the halls, and even the air seemed lighter, freer. Yet even as they stood together, holding hands, there was a flicker of something distant, a reminder that the world outside still held challenges, secrets, and dangers. The curse was gone, but the kingdom itself was not free of darkness. They had won this battle, but the journey was only beginning. Seraphine leaned into Kale, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her hand. It was a rhythm she had longed for without knowing it, a connection born of courage, trust, and a love that had begun as forbidden, but had transformed into something undeniable. "You have changed everything," Kale whispered. "No," Seraphine replied, her voice steady, eyes shining. "We have changed everything. Together." They stood there side by side, watching the first rays of sunlight touch the fortress walls. The curse that had once threatened to consume them had been turned into a bond of their choosing, a bond forged in courage, tempered by trust, and sealed by the quiet understanding that love, even in the darkest of circumstances, could triumph. And though the future was uncertain, though challenges would come and the world would not always be kind, Seraphine knew one thing with absolute certainty. She and Kale had faced the impossible together, and in doing so, they had discovered the power of their hearts. The kingdom of Aeloria awoke to a new day, unaware that in the shadowed halls of the northern fortress, two souls had rewritten fate itself. The curse that had once threatened to control them had become the spark of a love that no magic could undo. A love that would stand against shadows, storms, and time itself. And in the quiet aftermath of the storm, as dawn painted the sky in gold and silver, Seraphine and Kale held each other close, knowing that the forbidden had become possible, the dark had become light, and the curse had become love.